Much for joining us on this beautiful Sunday before Memorial Day, and taking the time for these important conversations. I'm Sue Richko. I'm one of the co-founders of the Lady Liberty League, along with Tom Early and Laura Hudak. And just a few upfront reminders, please keep your microphones on mute, and if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and our trusted moderator, Tom Early, will get to them after our presentation is complete. So without further ado, I'm super excited to introduce today Mayor Michael Brennan from University Heights. And just a little background on Mayor Brennan. Since taking office in 2018, Mayor Brennan has led a transformative era in University Heights, establishing the city's first economic development department, modernizing housing and zoning laws, and launching bold initiatives in sustainability, public safety, and community engagement. He also secured over $2 million in public safety grants. He introduced the city's first bike lanes. He rolled out progressive recycling programs, and he spearheaded the redevelopment projects like the Bell Tower Center. Mayor Brennan also serves on regional boards, including NOACA and the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission, advocating for sustainable development, multimodal transportation, and climate action. In this session today, he will discuss the real-world challenges of running a municipality under the current administration and what it means for local leadership and progress at the municipal level. And I think I failed to mention that Mayor Brennan has a dual role. He's mayor and he is also safety director. So without further ado, Mayor Brennan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sue.
You're
And
welcome.
thank you to the Lady Liberty League for having me on this Sunday. And thank you to all of you for taking time on a beautiful holiday weekend to hear from me and to get together to talk about issues that matter. Um, I don't pretend that everybody knows who I am, so I'm going to go into my own background a little bit further. Thank you for the introduction. I come from a family of teachers and laborers and salesmen. And my dad was a science teacher and was the president of his union. My mom retired from a New York corporate investigations firm and spends her free time as a peace and justice activist when she's not spoiling her favorite grandson. My dad's parents were factory workers. My mom's parents were a salesman and a secretary. My stepmom and my sister are former public school teachers, and I went to law school. My mom's political awakening began when I was a child. In a year's time, she went from being the president of the Altar Rosary Society at our church to being the president of the local Now chapter. After my parents divorced, we moved from Geneva to Youngstown, and we did that at a time when the city was in continuing decline following the collapse of the steel industry. I cut school, middle school, when I was 1984 to go to a political rally. And I saw Dick Celeste and Teddy Kennedy and Fritz Mondale and Jim Trafficant. And my view of the affluent 80s was from the south side of Youngstown, the kind of place that prosperous times just did not reach anymore. My mom taught me to see good in people, to seek justice, to seek peace. My grandfather taught me how to pray. My father taught me about reason and philosophy. My uncle taught me that gay people are just like everyone else. My other uncle taught me how to run a business, and living in a declining steel city and in rural Ashtabula County taught me about poverty.
Mhm.
And living in a single parent household taught me challenges that women face. I first got interested in city politics in another college town, Bowling Green. When I went to Bowling Green State University, the city used a ward system for city council, and they packed the university and all of its students in a single ward. Nearly half of the city's population were represented by just one single council person. We started a fight over voting rights that went on for years, and it inspired me to go and graduate from law school. Uh, After making the law review, I clerked for well, I interned for Congressman Eric Fingerhut, and I clerked at the Department of Justice. I had lofty ideas about changing the world. Student loans put me in a more practical direction. I was a judicial staff attorney for Judge Kathleen Ann Satula at the Court of Common Pleas, and I worked at a boutique law firm before starting my own law practice. Along the way, I lived all over Greater Cleveland. I lived in University Heights in the late 90s, and then again from 2005 to today. Along the way, I lived in Cleveland, in Lakewood, in Brecksville, in Mayfield Heights, and in Cleveland Heights. I met my wife through a mutual friend. She was in a writing group, and we got married in 2007. Gina is my conscience, and she says that I'm the smartest person she knows, but I am certain that she's projecting. When the economy crashed in 2008, Gina had gone back to school. I'd made the perilous jump of opening my own law practice. Times were tough. We almost lost our house, but through hard work and some good luck, we made it through. I took cases I believed in consumer protection and employment rights, and it wasn't always lucrative, but I slept well at night. And Gina sings and writes. She worked in medical research, and now she works in community development at the city of Cleveland. So I grew interested in city politics and a desire to give back. I wanted to become more involved and engaged in the community. I was part of a citizen effort to build our community park, which is now known as Walter Stinson Community Park, or the WALT. And I was on the board of a CDC, Future Heights, which serves Cleveland Heights and University Heights as destinations to live, work, and play. And I sat up all night on election night 2016, and I thought about where our country was after electing Trump. And in his farewell address, Barack Obama said, if you're disappointed by your elected officials, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, run for office yourself. And I felt like he was talking to me, and I did exactly that. I had never thought of myself as somebody who would be a candidate for office, but then that's exactly what I did. Um, as it turns out, it turned into a run for mayor. I'd never sought elected office before. I made history in our city. It was the first time a challenger had beaten a sitting incumbent mayor. At the end of the night, I was ahead by 50 votes. And that's the margin. That was the margin. Don't let anybody tell you that every vote doesn't count and that all the efforts taken to win an election, it was all good effort. I don't know which one thing was the thing that did it, but I had 4 years, got us through the pandemic, 4 more years, re-election, and then in January of this year, January 14th, week before Trump actually formally took office, I made my announcement that I would not be seeking re-election to a third term. Um, in some respects, the decision 8 years ago to do something more in light of Trump being elected meant a run for mayor. And 8 years later, the decision of what to do now in the face of Trump's reelection, I didn't know, and I still don't know exactly what it is. Like many of you, I'm still feeling out the ways that, we can better further democracy in light of what's going on. But it felt like running for mayor a third term just wasn't enough. It wasn't the thing, it wasn't the answer at this time. So, I'm going through the different things like many of you, responding to the many changes and attacks on our institutions, on people, on our democracy.
Mhm.
And these are things that I continue to work through. I want to finish strong this year, and I'm certainly not phoning it in as the mayor. But there are some things that are kind of unique in my community that I want to touch on. I know that some of the things that we sometimes talk about or you sometimes hear about is how Parma, went for Trump, and how did this happen? Why did this happen? But one of the things that's also been lost in that is the fact that in University Heights, where I live, the precinct that went strongest for Trump in all the county happens to be in my community. We had one precinct in my community, Precinct H, which went 70% for Donald Trump. You can go onto Signal and see the precinct by precinct breakdown. Yeah, you'll see the orange to pink shades in Parma. You'll see some darker red and in Valley View, Strongsville. But then you get to University Heights, you get to the east side, you see this sea of blue, and then you see this deep red, the darkest red spot on the map. And that happens to be where two of my city council people live, two of my MAGA city council people. And it is a challenge. It is a challenge
Mhm.
because when I ran for mayor 8 years ago, I was trying to transcend what we were seeing in Washington. I wanted to bring to the local level, something that set a tone and do things that we weren't going to see in Columbus, that we definitely weren't seeing in Washington, and do this thing here. And for a little while that worked. But as time has gone on, the city council has changed, and our vice mayor, quote unquote, that's our president of council, is a MAGA Republican. It has the support of some registered Democrats, but none of them were the endorsed Democrats in the last city council election. All the people that were endorsed by the party, none of them were elected. Instead, it was Michelle Weiss, Sherry Sachs, and their supporters. So I'm dealing with a not just a Republican, but basically a MAGA do-nothing council who has attacked me repeatedly. When I stood up on behalf of the 69% of my community that voted for Kamala Harris, made a couple of statements after the election. That city council unanimously censured me for my comments. It was on the front page of the November 20th Plain Dealer this past year. And I feel like I need to say this statement. I want to read for you my statement of November 9, 2024, which were some of the remarks, not all of them, but some of the remarks that led to my censure. And I want you to think about how wrong was I? Donald Trump was very clear on this, and you don't have to wonder where he stands. A vote for Donald Trump is a vote for xenophobia, sexism, racism, transphobia, and mass deportation. It's a vote against NATO and for Russia. It's a vote against liberal democracy and for authoritarianism. As an American and supporter of democracy and our constitutional republic, I categorically reject everything Donald Trump stands for. Women have died and will continue to die because of his position against abortion. Trump himself is a shady businessman who stiffed his contractors and walked into teenage beauty pageant dressing rooms. He is a rapist and a felon. There are marriages and families who are endangered by his reelection, people who live right here in the Heights community whose lives are in danger. I stand for rights and equality for our black and brown brothers and sisters, our immigrant brothers and sisters, our LGBTQIA plus neighbors, and the religious and non-religious. Tolerance is a social contract of mutual respect among all groups. A vote for Donald Trump breaks that contract, and it puts people in danger. It is time that the self-serving false front of a neutral, nonpartisan Trump supporter and voter be called out for what it is: basic bullshit. Trump is not ambiguous about how he feels or who he will allow close to the levers of power. Many will be lost, deported, marginalized, imprisoned, or killed in the process. So, if in spite of all that, if you feel called out for voting for him, you aligned yourself with Trump and his hate. You listened to his rhetoric, you walked into a voting booth, and you filled the circle next to his name. That is the choice you have to live with. If you stand by that vote, shame on you. And if you insist on doubling down on that vote with another round of inflammatory, defamatory, and absolutely false rhetoric to somehow justify your vote, that says far more about you than about anyone else. In the meantime, I will continue to fight for democratic values and progress here in University Heights and beyond. That was my statement of November 9th, 2024. And I think, if anything, the only thing I'm guilty of is understatement. Because what we have seen since January 20th of this year is this and so much worse. And a unanimous censure by my city council for being divisive and for attacking residents in making this statement. So it is a challenge. It is a challenge to stand up for the things that not only that you believe in, but the institutions of this country, the things that have, if I may take their words, have actually made America great. And the things that are, dragging down the country, the things that are, that we are suffering from. I got residents in my community who, they look at my words and they're like, well, Mayor, that's nice and all, but, and you're a great mayor, but I really don't want to hear your opinion on those things. I just want you to pick up my trash and make sure the police and the fire trucks come and make sure the snow is cleared, which that's all very important. It's all very important as a local mayor that you do those things. But I would be abdicating my responsibility as a leader, leader in the community, if I do not, tell you not just what I think, but what I understand to be correct, from my education, from my experience as an American. And as somebody who has grown up and thought about this, somebody who's an attorney and respects the rule of law, and and when we said that democracy was on the ballot, last November, that wasn't just a slogan. I mean, democracy, the rule of law, our institutions, federal agencies, everything from the National Institutes of Health to our universities, they've all been impacted. Our standing in the world is impacted. Scientific and medical research are impacted. The rights to due process have been impacted. The fact that Abrego Garcia is still, in El Salvador and has not been brought back to have a proper hearing. I mean, it may turn out that he would have to be deported, but we haven't had a proper hearing to know. And that is the cornerstone. Due process is the cornerstone
Aren't
of
aren't
American.
we innocent until proven guilty and not
Mhm.
vice versa?
That is so true. That is so true.
Hmm.
So and you get the opportunity to have a hearing.
Hmm.
That's what we often talk about the founders, Sue. We
Yes.
often talk about and we hold up high, the founders that wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and they
Mhm.
deserve some reverence. They were just men. And
Mhm.
and they made a lot of compromises, a lot of compromises. But what we don't talk about nearly enough is how we reformed the Republic in 1868. We don't talk enough about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. We don't talk enough about birthright citizenship and extending, well, we do. I mean, we hear about ending birthright citizenship, but when we reformed the Republic after the Civil War, we made that a right, a constitutional right. We made procedural due process and equal protection
Mhm.
constitutional rights. We made it the right in this country that the Bill of Rights extends to all levels of government. That just like Congress shall not pass a law to abridge freedom of speech, neither can Columbus, neither can my city council.
Mhm.
Neither can I violate your First Amendment rights as your mayor. And my city council shouldn't be trying to violate mine. So, so these are, this is really, what America's about. We should be celebrating 1868 as much as we celebrate 1776 and 1789.
Could I pause for a minute and
Yes.
just give some background to, the people who are listening? So your
Mhm.
city council body is
Mhm.
composed of 7 council members, correct?
That is correct.
And you have two who you refer to as mega extreme Republicans.
That is correct as
So
well.
that push against you, you would have to have a majority.
Right.
So what are the other dynamics with the remaining 5?
Certainly. Yeah, three of those five all owe their elections to the two MAGA representatives because they financed and bankrolled their campaigns and ran as a ticket
Okay.
against the endorsed Democrats. And they all won. So, good for them. Congratulations on running a successful campaign. And then they proceeded right away to work at trying to recall me as mayor as punishment for backing the endorsed Democrats against them.
So they censured you in 24 for
Mhm.
what they framed as opinion, but I'm going to maybe speak for you a little bit that you frame as responsibility. Your statement about Trump being elected into office and what Trump stands for. Um, so they censured you for those reasons. Um, do you get the sense that there's a larger issue at play when we have two MAGAs who recruited two Democrats into a race against which, my personal opinion, your candidates that you ran were
Mhm.
highly credentialed and qualified and would have made excellent municipal legislators. But do you get the sense that there's a little bit of duplicity within the party, which there are Republicans posing as Democrats, not only for electability, but
Mhm.
also as a strategy of infiltration? Because it seems to me that the well thought out plan, and I don't mean that out of respect, I mean it out of recognizing it was a well thought out plan by the Trump administration, would appear as it unravels that it began from the bottom out. So they had people who were working with others in villages and cities throughout. I mean, we have what, 1,000 in the state of Ohio, village, cities, townships, or shade below. But in all of the states, working with school board members and council members and mayors and police chiefs and fire chiefs, and going outward. Have you seen a shift? And do you think there is an infiltration, if you will?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are lots of ways we could characterize it, and I'm not going to pretend to know what's in the hearts of three of my council members who are registered Democrats, but align themselves, with the MAGA part of our council, and selected a MAGA council member to be their leader on council. But at the same time, two of them co-sponsored the Pride Caucus event back in March that was held in Lakewood, and then they brought their MAGA colleagues with them to it. Dave Brock, our party chairman, is like, "What are they doing here? What's going on? Why are they taking these pictures here?" And then they got out of there fairly quickly, I understand. For the big picture of all the Democratic supporters of the Pride Caucus. But it's there's an effort that's being made to, in an instance like that, to pinkwash these two folks, to make them seem like they're something they're not. I've seen them up close. I know exactly, what they are. And I know that, they try to front that because city council is technically a nonpartisan office in my community, and mayor is a nonpartisan office, that none of those things involving national government should matter here. But of course they matter. They matter because, funding matters, and direction from Columbus and from the federal government matters, and HUD and CDBG and things that affect our community and the communities around us, of course, matter. When you have ICE going around arresting folks in the Heights, when we had a taqueria that was raided by ICE, that was in Cleveland Heights, not University Heights, but and they took people away. I mean, my police department doesn't get involved in things like that. But if you have a MAGA mayor, who knows what they'll do or what they'll be told to do. We're
Right.
not
I
going to do that.
mean, and there is a push to deputize all levels of law enforcement from this administration, and that becomes deeply concerning. I want to just kind of segue a little bit. I mean, I'm a city councilwoman as well, and we prioritize safety services, our police, our fire,
Mhm.
our maintenance crews. And we do things like improve the quality of roads, especially in Northeast Ohio, as best we can, with
Mhm. It's a tough
oftentimes,
winter.
yes, it was a
Yeah.
very tough winter. And, soliciting those grants that could, help that. I mean, there's a whole tangled mess that I talked to Tom about before this call, that we could spend 5 calls on talking through in terms of, getting grants and funding and having our rightful tax dollars back into our local funds from the state level. But, when we're practicing from a municipal level, either as a mayor or a city council person, our focus is roads, our focus is safety services, our focus is our communities, our parks, our amenities, bringing the community together. And, it's just so disheartening and it's deeply disturbing that to serve these political agendas, some of these political dynamics take the forefront and put all of those priorities on the back burners. Have you experienced now an issue in trying to get some of your projects to progress forward in these dynamics?
Yes, yes, I have. I'll be candid here. Our roads are suffering, I think, more than they really ought to be in our community because of efforts that our council has made to undermine my ability to work with our own city engineer to do infrastructure projects in our community. They revamped the city engineer position, which caused the previous city engineer to quit. They made this big show about how he was retiring, but he's still a city engineer in 5 other cities. He didn't retire. He got run off by our council. And then our new city engineer is great, but she was starting from square one, and and because they have taken control over how projects are assigned to the engineer, they didn't approve till 2 months ago, after almost a year and a half, um, um, an update of our road inventory. So when we went into the budget this last year, we were basically flying blind. We knew which streets needed to be done just from riding around and looking at them. We didn't actually have a formal report from our engineer because they hadn't authorized her to do one. And it's when you take away authority, but then insist on pushing the responsibility, saying that somehow the mayor's office is responsible for making sure the roads are taken care of, but you've taken away the authority to actually do the work. And then you withhold that authority to a point where things aren't being done, then you try to blame the mayor's office for it. I want to be very clear here, Sue. I know you're a city council
Mhm.
person, like you said, and when I'm railing against city council, it's against my city council, not against
Sure.
you, and not against a lot of other city council people and a lot of great communities. There are a lot of good people who have put themselves out there like you have to make the community better. And some of my favorite people around town are city council people, uh, just not so much in my own community.
Sure,
So,
no,
so
understood. And
yes.
I know that, and I know your mind and heart before this call, but I do want to just make it clear for people who are listening and don't know that dynamic.
Yeah. And there are a lot of things that we're very concerned about. Like University Heights is a small community, so we don't get CDBG funding. We're not an entitlement community, but Cleveland Heights is, and
Mhm.
Cleveland Heights is right next door. And if CDBG goes away, that affects us. We share a business district with them. We share a school district with them. We share a library system with them. It's kind of like the relationship between Parma Heights and Parma and Seven Hills,
Mhm.
where if you don't have if one of those communities suffers in a big way, it's going to affect the others.
Yes,
So even though there are a lot of programs that are going away that we weren't necessarily the direct beneficiaries of in the first place in a community like mine, it is affecting the region and it does affect us as a consequence. So this is a problem and will continue to be a problem and is a challenge for mayors and council people across the county and really
100%.
across the
Thank
country.
you. Yes.
Mayor, you mentioned a pretty specific example of your own council impeding a city planning type situation with the roads. Do you believe that is a direct result of what MAGA and the Trump administration's mere existence has made life difficult in running a local municipality at this point? And are there other examples where maybe you wouldn't have seen this prior to Trump or MAGA in general?
Well, I mean, MAGA is obviously bigger than just what's happened in 2024. But yeah, I mean, in my own community, eight years ago when I was first elected, I had a very different city council. And there's only two people now on the current council that were there when I was first elected. We got a lot of good stuff done the first couple of years. And then there's a lot of things that I ran on that they would be fools not to support, such as the redevelopment of University Square into Bell Tower Center. That's happening, and that was one of the major reasons I ran. It was one of the major planks of why I was running for mayor. For what I could do in our community, and we got that done. So that's something where even this council knew better than to do something than to derail that project. But there's a lot of other things that they have done. We're in the middle of the zoning code update, which has been years in the making. And they've basically derailed it. They've slowed it down, and then they've declined to follow the recommendations of our zoning consultant. And all of these first ring suburbs around Cleveland, they're all just a few bad decisions away from stagnation and decline. And the way that you avoid that is by ensuring that you keep making progress, that you are doing the things you need to do to attract good residents, attract good business, keep your tax base strong. And if you don't do those things, if you cling on to the past without appreciating that change is happening regardless, you can either direct that change or you can be run over by it.
Mhm.
And instead of directing the change and rolling with the punches of being a first ring suburb in Cuyahoga County, we've got people that are standing aloft progress, trying to stand athwart it, and instead, in spite of all the good things that we've done these last 8 years, I'm concerned about the future of my community.
Mhm.
Speaking of the future, with your decision to seek out another path in which your growing society and the way you view is best, how are you setting up the next administration to continue that path of progress, perhaps in spite of the current makeup of council? Or are there things you can do to make it exciting for you as a resident of University Heights for future generations of that city?
Well, yes, thank you. No, I'm glad you asked that. Um, we're in an interesting spot right now. The person who I thought was going to run for mayor to succeed me ended up stepping away and not doing it. One of the people that is running is the person who's been the leader of the opposition. And right now, she looks pretty good for perhaps winning. It doesn't look so good about how she'll actually do as mayor, but that's something else. There's another person that's pulled petitions, but he's a perennial candidate who tends to pull petitions and file for various offices, but not campaign much. He's a nice enough guy, but I don't know have any reason to think he's really going to campaign for this office any harder than he's campaigned for any other. So right now, the city's at a bit of a crossroads. I really hope somebody good does step forward who hasn't actually pulled petitions yet. Um, at the same time, what I can do is make sure that I'm leaving the city in the best position it can be. When I arrived, our finance department was in complete disarray, and I had to fire everybody and start over. We've had clean audits, and we've had strong finance. Our finance director just retired, and he's leaving really at the end of this coming week. Our new finance director just arrived. Um, we're making sure that the projects that ought to be done are on track, and that if the next mayor doesn't do what he or she ought to, then that's on them. But we are putting them in a great position to build on the work that we've done while making it their own. So hopefully, we're leaving things in a way so that the next mayor, whoever they are, even if it's the person I hope it's not, will not have any excuse from us for not doing a good job and for not serving the community in the best way that hopefully they will.
So on that, can I just inject in really quick? So I know that you referenced just a few minutes ago that Precinct H, I believe, went 70% Trump.
Mhm.
But overall, University Heights, correct me if I'm wrong, they went 70% for Vice President Harris. So it would seem to me that the residents are truly in alignment, in oppositional alignment against this Trump administration and their agenda. If the person who you don't favor to be mayor gets in, do
Mhm.
you do you have fears that the residents are potentially voting for what's familiar and the name they know without really understanding the policies and the values, and that their agenda campaigning may look and sound different than their agenda and policy once they are sworn in and acting as mayor?
Yeah, I think that is a big part of the issue. And I think that happened also in 2023 when this block ran, because a lot of the people that were part of that block were familiar, to the community. They're the names that are in the paper and so on. Um, and I think part of what happened was, we had the issue one vote and the issue two vote, abortion and marijuana, and we had a high turnout election, much higher than we typically have in a municipal election. And um, the the ticket of council candidates who were running on the things that I was doing and had the endorsement of the local party um, basically got run over and lost in that whole melee with of issue one and issue two, which were very important, and they passed, overwhelmingly in University Heights. But then so did the familiar names. It was almost like the name game that people say happens with the judges. They were familiar with these names for some reason, so people just voted for them, I think. And also there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance. Things in the city are going well because of the work of my administration. So it's a little bit hard to tell people, hey, things are going great. You need to change out these council people. It doesn't necessarily make sense without having to explain it at length. And when you're trying to explain those sorts of things, that makes it difficult, for people to understand. What I think is going to happen is this: if nobody steps forward that to carry the mantle of what we've been doing as a mayoral candidate, then they certainly won't have any trouble finding somebody next time, because the person who is currently the vice mayor, if she becomes the mayor, these things are going to go away. The things that we've been working on for 8 years aren't going to happen, and people are going to say, "Hey, whatever happened to all that?" And then they're going to look to her and they're going to say, "You're the problem," and then they'll figure it out. Sometimes you need the pendulum to swing that way before it swings back. But I really would try to spare that for our community. That's one of the reasons why I did announce early this year in January to allow people the opportunity to try this on for size and consider it. But I think part of it's also that this city council's toxic, under her leadership, and I think people aren't necessarily interested in going through what I've had to go through, doing what I'm doing while having to fight every step of the way. You know, it's I will tell you that that's not the reason why I'm not running for reelection. 8 years is a long time for me to do anything. My own resume, 5 or 6 years at this firm, 5 or 6 years at that firm, about 7, 8 years practicing on my own. 8 years is a good jumping off point for me to move on to my next thing professionally, whether it's in government, whether it's another office, whether it's in the practice of law, um, whether it's something else in public service. But but it was a lot easier to walk away, knowing that I didn't have to argue with MAGA people over the color of the sky or the order of the alphabet. I mean, these are things that shouldn't be so hard, that are made harder and get in the way of progress, get in the way of effective governance.
I wanted to call out and feel like acknowledge a tough decision you said you had to make with your finance department. You saw an issue and had to relieve them in order to bring in people that you thought could and would get the job done. I think that's brave, walking into a place and being like, I need new people, right? Because those are real lives, but you saw what the benefit was by redoing it and saw the vision of that future. If you were to look at that still and give advice maybe for us at what to look at in different cities Like,
Mhm.
what should we keep an eye on in different departments that maybe don't get enough attention that could
Mhm.
truly be successful and incredibly impactful on a local municipality basis that doesn't get enough attention?
Okay. Yeah. Well, finance is the lifeblood of any organization. So you want to make sure you have a good finance department. It's not sexy, it's like, oh, we got a strong finance director, but it's very important because if your money's not right, nothing else is right. So you got to have that. You got to make sure that you have a good grasp on what you have and what you can spend and what you can afford, and that you don't overextend yourself, and that you find the resources you need to do the things that have to be done. Along with that, I would say that housing is very important. You can't let your housing stock go. It is so much harder to bring it back than it is to maintain it. Everybody wants to live in well-kept streets. Nobody wants to get a notice of an exterior violation, but everybody wants to live in a neighborhood where all the houses are kept up. So it's a little bit like eating your vegetables and making sure you exercise 3 days a week. You got to take care of, the concrete, the paint. You got to make sure that things are right. And it's a lot harder to bring it back than it is just to maintain it. Finally, we created an economic development department in our community. We didn't have one. Most cities, I think, do at this point, but we were one that didn't. Previous mayors acted like economic development was just something that happened to us as opposed to something that we went out and got. And you got to work with developers. You got to work with businesses. You got to seek out, what you're looking for. You do it in a myriad of ways, but part of it's just being out there and engaged. You want to make sure that you're working with the businesses you do have already, so that they're not being courted by somebody else to go away, but to let them know that when they hear from the city, it isn't just because there's a problem, but because we're genuinely concerned and want to make sure that they have what they need to be successful in our community, that they are part of our community, they're a stakeholder in the community, even if they don't live there. They're employing people that do live here, or they're employing people that are providing services and goods to people who live here. So they are part of the community. We do value them. It's also making sure that your building department is well run. It's making sure that your zoning code is up to date, so that if somebody comes in to bring a business that you want, you don't want to have a dozen variances in order to make it happen. You want to make sure that you are clear about what it is that you want in your community, and then streamline the laws in such a way so that it facilitates them getting in here and getting that done. One of the things that we've been terrible at, and I don't mean just our community, I mean all over this country for some time, is that we put on all kinds of rules and regulations and processes, all with very good intentions, everything from the environment to making sure that certain hiring goals are met and so on. And it makes it that much harder to do projects, to the point where, the Empire State Building back in the 30s was built in a year. Who would ever hear of such a thing now? These things are years in the making before you even see a shovel hit the ground. And at some point, there are opportunities that are lost just because things languish from the planning side, in order to the point where we have to do tax abatements and other policies to find ways to do carve outs, so that in order to encourage a business, we have to cut a bunch of red tape. Part of the problem is we put the red tape there in the first place.
I hear that. I'm glad you touched back because I heard 3 points there. One, in terms of finance, making sure your money for the city is there under control, right? Under scrutiny, perhaps at times, making sure the money is going where it needs to go. Ways to get involved, I assume, is getting in touch with your local city council people for their budgets, for approvals, and maybe even looking at revenue streams as well, like where those taxes are going and who's managing them and how are they bucketed. You
Yeah.
did
Mhm.
mention housing
Mhm.
as an important aspect, and then you came back and touched on the building commission and zoning in general, and how to manage that housing or maybe increase housing. Are there any other ways that we can increase housing or fix that shortage that exists virtually everywhere?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, housing and affordable housing is a big problem right now in our country, and not just in our country. It's also a problem in Canada. I was just spent some time up there and saw that they have their share of issues there too. I can tell you that here in Ohio, these are numbers from the end of last year. Pre-pandemic in 2019, about three-quarters of Ohioans could afford to buy a house if they wanted to. Today, it's less than half. In Indiana, they have double the new housing starts that we have here in Ohio, and they have half the population. And that's not good for us. That's not good for Ohio. Um, we need to make sure that we are that we are building housing that people can afford and that can allow them to generate wealth. And at the same time, maybe we need to reframe some of this, remembering that housing is a human need. It ought to be a human right, and that we turn housing into an investment where it's an investment that you live in, but you really can't tap into. And when really you just need someplace to live. And when it comes to investing for your future, it doesn't have to be in a house. It can be in your portfolio. It can be in other vehicles where you put your savings that are in a better position to become liquid when you need them, as opposed to the place that you live. My house went up by 45% in the triennial reassessment, but I can't really tap into that unless I borrow it against it or unless I sell it. And if I sell my house, well, then I still need someplace to live, as do you all. So that is not necessarily the best planning for one's future. I realize I've gone a little far flung here, but 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 that is an issue, and we need to be finding ways to diversify our housing, and in University Heights, we're the second most densely populated community in the county and in the state. So we want to be able to leverage our density. We're looking at ADUs. We're looking at elimination of single family residential zoning in favor of simply straight residential zoning, to encourage people to add that in-law suite, to have a duplex, to reconfigure the home or add an ADU, add an apartment over a garage, add a small home into the backyard. All these things are things that we could possibly do, but you have to get away from a little bit of the old style thinking about, well, we didn't used to do that, so why should we do it now? Or, oh my goodness, what if somebody rents that thing to a student? Well, what if they do? And don't students need somewhere to live?
I hear that a lot, especially
Yeah,
I believe it's called NIMBYism, right? It's
NIMBYism,
Yeah.
yes.
everybody wants it, but
Not
just
in their
not there,
backyard.
not there,
Yes.
anywhere but
My
there.
my
Yeah,
favorite that I heard not too long ago was banana. Build absolutely nothing, anyone near anybody.
I've never heard that before. I'm pretty
Well, you've
excited
heard
about
it here now. I didn't come up with it. That's not mine, but you may
going
take
in.
it.
Y- You bring up so many excellent points. I would love to bring you back on just to talk through some of these challenges in general at a municipal level. But, and I did hear you when you said, the impact of the federal funding from the current administration isn't heavy in your city directly, but proximally, and that does have an impact. And, targeting um, America First cities as recipients of these federal dollars now and punishing what maybe this administration would consider blue cities with the holding back of these dollars. It does have a huge impact. And, there are the grants, Safe Streets and Sidewalks, the CDBG, which you referenced, and others. And by the way, you do have an excellent finance director now,
Oh yeah,
personally.
you know our
I
new
can
finance director, Katie. Yes.
Yeah, she is fantastic, and she will do amazing. But in some of these challenges, working across party lines in a nonpartisan municipality, but some of those inherent biases that we bring with us as municipal legislators and mayoral administrators of a city, how does that impact like your ability? You referenced zoning, you referenced, the inability to accommodate the modern day family and the needs in having an in-law suite or an apartment above the garage. You didn't bring up how you funded roads historically in the past, 8 years and prior to you coming on board, and some of that financial impact that it has brought to your doorstep when you were sworn in as mayor, and taking out bonds and those types of things. And I know that's kind of a wide net that I cast in a question, but if you can just maybe touch on some of those points in a more nuanced way for the people listening, I think it's valuable information.
Sure, there are a lot of directions I can go with that. One of your last points first, we pay for our road program generally from our general fund. And our general fund is mostly made up of our local income tax. A little bit of it is the property tax, but in University Heights, only about $10.25 of every $100 collected in property tax actually goes to the city. About $67 of that goes to the schools. The rest of it is going to, the county, the Tri-C, the metro parks, the port, the library, all important stuff. So when you hear people talking about ending the property tax, know that all these important, vital things are funded by it. So be careful with that. When it comes to roads, it's the cost of doing streets has gone up considerably ahead of inflation. A lot of that's because asphalt costs more. Petroleum is the base of asphalt, and petroleum is more. The labor associated, it has gone up. There are lots of reasons why it costs more to do streets. And, we need to make sure that we are adequately funding that. That is something that, people, you can judge your own place where you live by the conditions of your infrastructure, by the condition of your streets. Certainly others will. They ride through your community and it's nothing but potholes. They know that. They notice that. It doesn't make them want to live there or spend time there or spend money there or invest there. So you got to take care of that. Some of the, basic bread and butter stuff. You hope you never have to call the police. You hope you never need an ambulance. You hope you never have a fire. But we pick up your trash every week. We, clear the snow off the streets, and we got to fill the potholes, and we got to make sure that the streets look a certain way. If we're not doing that, we're not doing our jobs. That's the basic stuff that we have to do in local government. And at the same time, people need to appreciate that, the Ohio Constitution puts home rule at the municipalities. We got 59 separate municipal entities in this county. Most of us have our own fire department. Most of us have our own police department. And we got to pay for that locally. We pay for that by taxing our residents, which, it's not popular, but everybody wants a police department. Everyone wants a fire department. You got to have these things. You got to have ambulance service. You've got to have your trash picked up. So it's got to come from somewhere, and it's not popular ever having to raise taxes. I'm happy to say that we have not raised taxes the entire time I've been mayor. But at the same time, there are commitments our council's looking to make with regard to some of them made a promise to build a new police station, new fire station without raising taxes. They think they're going to borrow money and pay for it out of the general fund. Well, current interest rates, the kind of money they want to borrow, that's a $1.8 million a year payment over 30 years. That's $1.8 million that isn't going to roads. That's $1.8 million that isn't paying salaries for the police department and the fire department. You can't do that.
And you,
And in the end, you'll end up having to raise taxes somewhere else to cover it.
and you bring up such valid points across the board when it comes to property taxes. And think about in a state like Ohio, which at the state level is deeply red, and those rainy day funds that are being held and not replenishing our local funds the way they used to pre-2011. And now when we talk about our schools, where we used to pay 20, 30, 40% of our property taxes into public education, now we're hovering around 70% of those funds. It directly takes away from our responsibility and our ability to fill that responsibility for streets, potholes, snow removal, safety services, because that money is now being spent on public education. And all the while, money is being diverted out of that public education fund and into private school and charter school vouchers.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that's happened in Columbus these last few weeks in the budget discussions is they're not living up to their obligations to fulfill fair school funding. The Cupp-Patterson bill. I saw John Patterson yesterday. I spoke with him about this, and he's no longer in the House because of term limits. But the work that he and Speaker Cupp did in order to have fair school funding has basically been set aside. And we've got House members who say, "Oh, we can't afford to do that," while they're meanwhile funding other priorities, in the Cleveland Heights University Heights School District, there was supposed to be an additional 7 million that was coming, our way, which we were planning on. These schools have 5-year budgets and they have to plan, ahead. They have to budget ahead. So when you reduce 7 million to 700,000, I don't appreciate legislators who are saying, well, you're getting $700,000 more than you did last year, except that we were supposed to get 7 million and we planned on it. So that's a $6.3 million cut. There's really no other way of calling it, anything other than that. And you're not fulfilling the obligations, the promises that you've made to our public school children and to our public schools. A community like mine, we have a lot of people who do take advantage of vouchers, and we have an inequitable system where more money is spent per capita on voucher students than on public school students. That should violate equal protection. That shouldn't even be legal. That should be something that is just that should just be a non-starter. Plus, I don't know if people know this, but we now have, and no other state has this, a dollar for dollar tax credit on your state taxes, $750 a person, $1,500 a couple for donations to private schools. So when they say they don't have money for public schools, in the meantime, I can make a $750 donation, or my wife and I together a $1,500 donation, basically to the private school of my choice, and then take $1,500 off my state taxes. That is a complete misrouting of public resources. That should not be happening. And Ohio is the only one that does it to that degree. It's incredible.
And I know we're coming up on time, and Tom probably has comments and questions still in the chat that he wants to go through, but I will just throw this out there and leave it for another day. But we also have the burden of the state pushing forward with the unfunded mandate to increase the retirement funds from 19 to 24% for our police force, in keeping with our fire departments, which I think every municipal leader and every city council member agrees that we should balance that scales, but not with municipal dollars. It should definitely, and I understand it's a 6-year phase-in, but we should be getting the assistance from our tax dollars at the state level, like we should, to facilitate that.
I completely agree. I don't have a problem with increasing the pension cost per se. I have a problem with it being an unfunded mandate.
Agreed.
There is not nearly enough money that the state is sharing through the local government fund with municipalities. The state, if the state wants to see this, if this is going to happen, and I don't object to it happening as long as they pay for it, then either they need to pick up that tab directly, or that increase needs to be sent to the local government through the local government fund so that we can cover it. Otherwise, we're either looking at raising taxes or we're looking at reducing the number of police and firefighters we have. Otherwise, the money's got to come from somewhere, and it's got to add up ultimately.
Which the vast electorate, they are too busy living and working and taking care of their responsibility that they don't have the time to do the homework to gain awareness to understand that that's how this works. And so when we have to levy taxes to afford these funded mandates, they're looking at us as the bad guys at the municipal level.
Yeah. And our own police and firefighters, of course, they want to be taken care of, and I don't blame them. I mean, what they do is, they put their lives on the line for us.
Yes.
And that's meaningful to me. I will never be casual or cavalier about that.
100%.
So I don't want them to not get a pension increase if that's appropriate, but we got to find a way to pay for it. And for the state to just levy it onto local government and give us nothing to do it with, well, that's a huge problem. That can't happen.
Mayor, I would like to try and wrap this up as we do an hour,
Okay.
but win a maybe a more positive outlook here.
Certainly.
You are looking to step aside in the next year, right? And I would like to know, maybe as a private citizen, maybe it's the rest of the group, what are you doing what is your plan, and how do we also maybe get involved in ways that bridge this divide between our politics, or continue the city, the state, or federal government in a direction that we think is unifying
Okay,
for the
well,
country?
thank you, thank you. As for myself, I'm still deciding what it is I'll be doing in the new year. There's several things I'm looking at with regard to either staying involved in government but at a different level, or running for another office at a later date, or going back and practicing for a little while, perhaps in a different way. Taking the 8 years of experience I've had in government and finding a way to serve with that. Since I do have a law degree and there are about, 1 million or more federal employees looking for jobs, I don't necessarily want to compete with them on that field. But at the same time, there are lots of ways of making a difference, and I do want to get back, to that. There are awful things that are happening in Washington, sure. But the level of government that affects you the most all the time is your local government, and that is the place where we need people the most. That is the place where you are affected most immediately, most of the time. There are big things that happen out of Washington that it can be incredibly positive or incredibly damaging, sure, but without having good people at this level, at the local level, you can run a community right into the ground, regardless of the best things that happen in Washington or the worst things. I think about what happened in Youngstown back in the day when the steel industry went away, and some of that was because of corporate neglect, and some of that was due to government neglect. And it informs where I that informs my views on what we need to be doing generally, and the perils of not being engaged on the private side as good corporate citizens, not being engaged in the public side, and making sure that we're all working together and that we're looking out for everybody. And one of the best things that you can do, and I go back to Barack Obama, and if you're dissatisfied with your elected officials, lace up your shoes, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, run for office. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but you're always out there being part of the conversation and making things happen. And that is valuable. And anybody here who's, signed in on a Sunday of a holiday weekend, hearing some mayor from the east side talk about a few things like this, think about what else you could be doing, and why not you? Why not you doing this? So it's up to all of us. We are the ones we've been waiting for, as Barack Obama used to say.
I'm so glad you brought it back to your Obama quote that got you inspired to run for mayor. I know there's a very popular website out there called Run for
I
Something.
see that. Yeah.
.net. I threw it in the chat. I love this advice. I think it's a great way to get involved. I always want people to vote as a baseline, but we have a group of passionate people that want to see society succeed. And being a public servant like yourself, I think is inspirational to others. So I appreciate your time and your wisdom and sharing that with us today. I'm very grateful for it.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Thank you to Liberty League. Thank you to everyone who tuned in.
Sue, is there anything you'd like to say before we go?
No, but yes, I'll take that back. Yes, there is. There are some very excellent people on this call who would provide an amazing public service if they decided to run for office. And I am definitely happy to help in any of those efforts. You know who you are.
Yes.
Well, thank you, everyone. Our next meeting will be on June 8th at 1 p.m. And look for our newsletter and information on who you will see next for the Lady Liberty League. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great day, great Memorial Day. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.